Good morning and welcome to this week's Jump Recruitment discussion. This week we're back from our summer holiday, so I hope everyone's summered very, very well. And this week we're hitting a real nail on the head. And I've been talking to lots of recruitment agencies about this, why 50% of recruitment firms lose their best clients and how to stop it. If you think about some of the stats that I sent out, 79% of micro agencies generate at least 50% of their revenue from their top key clients. That means only 21% of recruitment agencies are generating revenue repeatedly from more than their top clients. And guess which clients are growing? It's quite simple. 34% of agencies only retain their clients for 2 to 5 years, while 26.7 keep them for 5 years, which suggests a significant turnover in the marketplace. So today, Dave and I are going to address this point of view. Heather is on a HR case, which will be quite interesting. Can't tell you about, which is quite interesting. She's only told us the outline, and it is very interesting. Outside of recruitment, though. And Paul is just enjoying himself at the moment. So we shall carry on without Paul as we go.
I think Howard secretly Heather is on an HR case that involves Paul.
So let's not
for
spread.
answering the questions, taking too long.
Let's not spread malicious rumor or malicious gossip on there. So let's jump straight into the question. We've got loads to cover today. We've got loads of things that I think could be really interesting for people working from there. So when we are teaching recruitment leaders to conduct a health assessment of their clients, what's the most common blind spot do they have? And how do you get them to see the warning signs that their relationship is rationalizing away, has been rationalizing away for months?
Yeah, it's a great question, Had. And I think one of the things that I've observed whenever I'm talking to recruitment leaders about their most significant clients, their biggest clients, the ones that have had the longest, is the assumption that all is okay. And I think that's one of the biggest blockers is that the clients are good clients, they've been with them a long time, and therefore everything is okay. And then suddenly it's not. And you look back and there's a whole host of things that have got in the way of you not retaining that client's business. I remember dealing with a company we worked with, and they had Coca-Cola as a huge client, and it genuinely looked to be really good. And then at the last minute on a renewal, they were completely undercut on price, and it was other people in the business were making the decision that were involved more with the finance side of things and just wanted the price. The client we were working with won it back a year later because the lowest price couldn't deliver. But the point was that they lost it for a while. So I think it's about keeping close to the client and continually asking them, the people that you're involved with, are you engaged with the right people? Are you close enough? Do you know what's going on? And the feedback, constantly asking for feedback, because in that feedback you pick up, actually there may just be a little point of diversion here where we may not be agreeing or they may not be liking what we're doing. So it's off continually asking for feedback, and just being aware that at any time this could go.
I think it's really interesting when we start to look at what's the most common blind spot. And I have this conversation an awful lot, and I've been working with the team network an awful lot this year. And I can't tell you how many sort of free sessions I've done on our free 60-minute mentoring sessions with clients. And this blind spot comes out all the time. And I think it's most recruitment agencies, when they work with a client, sell their services only once, right at the beginning of that relationship. And then you think about all the interactions they have, then all the hundreds of agencies that are trying to break down that door into that client. That client is constantly being told there is a better offering, a better service, a better this, etc. So I think it's that complacency in aligning the services to the client's needs and then actually getting under the skin of the client so they can be proactive rather than reactive to the critical situations that the client needs, including recruitment. And it's so that we can provide lots of other things. And so if we want to keep the client sticky and with us, they've got to understand the services that we offer. And that means we've got to be close to the client, talking about our services. How many clients do I say, oh, I only offer perm? or the client thinks I only offer perm when they're offering temp or contract, and vice versa. Oh, I'm placing contract in there. They never take perm. It's that. So in reality, too many recruiters trust that their sell right at the beginning has had a huge impact when actually it hasn't. And what they think then is they've created with the client is trust, loyalty, even advocacy in that relationship, when actually it's a transactional relationship of one dimension and they're only offering one service. And I think that's the blind spot. And the warning signs to me is when they start to slow down their recruitment because they've got another agency, let's say that you're supplying perm, another agency is supplying temp or contract, and all of a sudden they now start to eat the perm cake as well. And all of a sudden your slice of the cake starts to thin, but you haven't realized that. You just think the client's slowing down. Then all of a sudden you completely disappeared out of the
They're
client.
gone.
And I think that's the blind spot, and the warning signs of that to sort of diminishing sort of client relationship is that slowdown of recruitment. And at the moment, we will be thinking that's because of the marketplace, when in actual fact, it could be because your cake or slice of cake is being eaten by other recruiters.
And to add to that, Howard, because we're in a tough market, our clients are looking on price. We always encourage people not to try to sell on price, but to sell on value. But actually, we may be doing the most brilliant job at selling on value and articulating it well. But ultimately, the client just wants the cheapest provider. Now, that may not be right for each of our businesses, but if that's what they want, you may end up losing a client because you're not aware of that, particularly in a market which is tough for many companies at the moment.
It is, and I think we're going to cover that in sort of later questions, Dave, when we talk about, you talk about price. And I think, it doesn't matter the type of market you're in. If your service is worth the price, then it's worth the price, and
Yeah.
clients will pay that service. And
Yeah.
that's about having that true relationship with your client, where they see you as a partner. They see you as a genuine partner, not as a suspect, as we keep saying. And once that happens, then they'll protect you. And if you remember rightly, when we started let's go back to when we started Jump. We started jumping, the start of the pandemic.
Yep. Yep.
And one of the questions we started to ask clients that we were working with at the time, and new clients coming into us, was how strong your client relationships are. And we had all this, they're great, they're trusted, they're loyal, they're all this, etc. And we asked them one question, didn't we? How many of your clients called you to check that you were okay when the pandemic started? And it was about 1 or 2%. And they suddenly realized that they're calling all their clients and reaching out, but their clients are never calling them. It's us that are reaching out, not the other way around. And it was that suddenly started to people think, I haven't got a relationship with my client. They're not bothered whether we were okay or not. We were just a casualty of the pandemic, and that would be it. There'd be other recruitment agencies to replace us, rather than those that would actually call them where they had a really strong relationship with that client. Those clients actually called the agency to check that they were okay and how that they were coping from there. So let's move on then. So most recruitment leaders think regular communication equals a healthy client relationship. How do you help them distinguish between a client who engages enthusiastically versus those who are just being polite while actually shopping around?
I think some of this comes down to the questions that you ask the client. So I was the account director, account manager for Lloyds Bank. So big client. We had 100 or so contractors there. I thought I was doing really well. I knew the various managers, but I also knew that they are always looking for other suppliers. So I always kept in. It was only when I brought my boss in, or he insisted that he came to see how I was doing, and he just asked some really great questions, which I've used ever since. He asked, because he could, because he was my boss, do you know what services we provide? So to your point, do you know what services we provide? And I hadn't clearly articulated that there were other services, so that wasn't great. But if you were shopping around now, so almost putting it into the mind of the client, we think you may be. Yeah? If you were shopping around now, why would you buy us? And why would you not? And of course, I'm sitting there furiously taking notes from it, bearing in mind I'm the top supplier with more than 100 contractors. and we've enjoyed a relationship for a significant number of years. But also, I was earning well from it, and I didn't want to lose the client. But I hadn't asked those questions. And there was nothing to stop me asking those questions, except I wasn't quite fully business aware at that time, and it took my boss to learn to learn off. So I think they are two really good questions that we can ask, because that will take out. You'll find out whether the client is just being a bit passive, or maybe just checking you out, or they're really engaged with you. And it was amazing what having someone like that open up. And the answers we got were fabulous.
I think it's interesting, isn't it, that we always talk about us going out and health checking the client and health checking what's going on. When reality, the only time the client comes to health check us is when they're looking to either
Yeah,
renegotiate a price or they're moving on, and
yeah,
they're just checking that that's the right decision for us, etc. So the question that I sort of posed was, how do you distinguish between clients who engage enthusiastically versus those who are politely shopping around? And I, similar sort of situation to you, Dave. So I remember sort of growing my desk as it was, and it was the same question in one of my reviews: how do you know that your client's engaged? And it sort of stumped me a little bit. Well, they're taking lots of contractors. He said, well,
yeah,
you've
yeah.
sold perm and you sold that in, etc. How do you know the client is genuinely engaged? And again, I was sort of struggling for an answer other than, well, I'm doing all the right things. I'm going to see them. I'm meeting them, etc., etc., etc. And my boss at the time came out with one simple comment. He said, how often are they calling you for advice? How often are they calling you in a planning meeting? Because we're an IT business selling IT contractors into contract work, and all those projects have different parts of the project where you can supply different contractors into. So are they calling you and discussing their plans? Are they calling you and discussing issues, but not just issues potentially with your contractors? Are they calling you and saying, look, I've got a contract here through another agency, I've got a supply through another agency, and it's appalling, or it's this, it's that? Are they calling with those? And he said, if you haven't got that type of response from your client, then you haven't got a relationship. So if you're just going down and doing a health check and finding out if everything's okay, and they're paying lip service to you and saying, yeah, everything's fine, etc., then they are probably shopping around. They're probably looking at other agencies. They're probably looking at other, bringing other people in and helping other people supply. They're probably still coming towards you, but what you're getting is less of an opportunity. So you might be one of two at the moment, but next week you might be one of three. So now your 50% opportunity has gone down to a 33% opportunity. And it suddenly dawned on me that I wasn't deep enough into the clients to actually understand the project life cycle, understand what they were trying to achieve, understand what was going on. Because once I started to talk about those type of things, which were above and beyond the recruitment marketplace, they started to talk to me about how I could help them with certain things. And that's when you start to get a really good relationship. And that's when we start to really nail relationships down. And that's when we start to build bigger opportunities for ourselves. And all of a sudden, once that started to happen, my contract book started to grow really quickly, rather than just this trickle effect that I was getting from certain clients, because they trusted me and I was talking to them about what they were trying to achieve, rather than talking about, do you need a head? Do you need a head? Do you need a head? And it was that comment that said, why aren't your clients calling you for advice? And it was interesting that I'd never seen
Yeah.
myself as an expert. And they said, just think, you're never going to challenge them on IT because they're the experts on IT, but you're the expert on the marketplace and what's happening in the marketplace and how you can help them in the marketplace. So you are an expert. So if they're not calling for your expert advice, they're just calling for your services, you haven't got a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right.
So if we talk about that, our recruitment clients, the ones that we work with, we often find that they're sat on huge gold mines of expansion opportunities within their existing client base. So what are the biggest revenue streams that you've seen a recruitment leader completely miss? And how do you train them to spot these gaps before the competitors do?
For me, I can give a really good example of a company that I've been working with for a little while now. And the challenge was exactly that. This organization has four distinct services, but it has a group of sales consultants, and each sales consultant sells one of the services. They're very good at contract, they do some perm, there's interim, and there's an on-site offering. But what they hadn't done was train all of the salespeople to be fully aware of all the services and to sell those services. So they were missing out. They were doing really well in providing a perm service within their client base, but the perm person wasn't introducing the fact that they sold contractors and certainly was missing out on the potential of search work and the potential of on-site embedded systems. So they started to do a dragon's den, and they got each of the consultants they had to pitch to a team of peers, so that they could see that they understood all the different services. And within probably about 4 or 5 weeks, within their existing client base, they had won 2 new pieces of business for services that they already had. Just the client wasn't aware of it. So for me, if you're in a team of more than 3 or 4 people and you've got more than 1 or 2 services, just make sure that everybody can articulate really intelligently all the services the company provides and knows the questions to ask to unhook those type of services. And then you're covering as many bases as you can. It really did work, and that's just been this year.
So I'm going to give a bit of an example from my own career, and then a couple of clients that I'm working with have got the same sort of thing. And I remember going into management, so I was a non-billing manager at the time, and the question was, about one of our biggest clients. At that stage, I had from scratch taken 2 people and grown them into being £1 million billers. And those £1 million billers, one of them was in with one very large client and was constantly saying, there is nothing else coming out of this client. There's nothing else coming out of this client. So the first thing that I sort of realized was, don't believe your salespeople. Because you've got to listen to what the salespeople are telling you first and foremost, but then you've got to challenge that to a certain degree. And that challenge when another salesperson came to me and said, look, I've got this opportunity at the same client as he has, okay, but he's not touching that opportunity. So we had this conversation. He was adamant that no one else was in there. So I said, right, okay, let's cure the conversation. Why don't we go down to the client? Because they're both at the same place. Meet the client, you meet your client, you meet your client, and we'll have this conversation. 18 months later, we've got £2 million revenue streams coming out of that client. The person who had the original £1 million revenue stream didn't even know that part of the business existed. And that sort of led to me when we start to look at that about building a proper organogram about the business and looking at who your sponsors are, who your buyers are, who the strangers are, who could potentially be a prospect in there. So actually planning the business all the way out and looking at, and quite literally when we went on site, we walked down a corridor and it was literally one side of the corridor to the other side of the corridor. But my consultant had been down there probably 100 times over the couple of years that he built this order book over there and had never even known that other side existed. So it's about that. So sometimes it's don't believe what's going on, okay, from there. The other side of that is, as you said, selling perm, selling contract, etc. And I put a mandate into an office that I took over, which was an office really struggling, saying that you can't go out to see a client unless there's a perm person and a contract person there on that meeting. And boy, did we double our revenue, because all of a sudden we were selling both services, and both services were getting an opportunity to sell to the client rather than one service trying to sell their service and forget the other guys. And so all of a sudden we go back to that question one. What they were doing is they were selling the services that we should be selling and constantly selling that. That big client, we ended up having to introduce the third service, which is the RPO service from Adecco, into that client. And they won that RPO service. So where we were thinking, great, we've got a £2 million revenue stream out of them, 3 years later, we had a £35 million revenue stream coming out of that client. So that's about involving everything in the business to make sure everyone covers that. And that could be perm, contract, temp, anything, that you can get. So I think it's about doing the right things, and it's about sometimes not believing because you might upset the big biller when you think, yeah, we've got everything coming out of that client.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that ever happens. Okay.
No.
So when you push recruitment leaders to map their clients' org charts for expansion opportunities, what percentage discover that they've only been working with one department while their competitors are embedded across 3 or 4 or 5? And how do you break that comfort zone of paralysis to ensure that that never happens?
Yeah, when I was looking at this last night, I reckon it's about 30%. So a third, less than a third of companies have really mapped out their clients well. And even the thought of mapping a client out is still quite new to some people, because you get in with a client or a division of a client. But I'm working with a company that's in the data center world, with a company that's just been bought by another company. So suddenly the organizational map has gone from this to now this, and it's quite global. So very, very difficult to map. And you can use tools on LinkedIn, and there's various IT tools you can use to do that. But it really does take quite some time to get to grips with it. And of course, so much of recruitment is day to day. And you've got to make the placements, you've got to track the candidates, you've got to help the candidate get over the line, or you're placing teams of people. So you don't take the time to actually map the client out. And there's a skill in mapping out a client. You may use a Miller-Hyman method, which is something that I was taught, and it's a great way. If you know any of the Miller-Hyman methods, there's books you can buy. You can go online. Most of them probably free now, but you can literally map out a client, and it's the sort of work we do, Had, when we're on site with some of our clients. Because if it is 30%, and it could be less than that, there's 70-80% more business to be had in existing clients, which is a lot easier than cold business development, which we know we've got to do at the same time. But the mapping is a skill in itself, and I would encourage everybody to map their clients and think of the clients by names of people in the client rather than the client. I've said this before, so if you're on this, and forgive me for repeating myself, but you don't deal with Ford Motor Company, you deal with John Smith, who runs the IT department of a section of Ford Motor Company. You don't deal with Innocent Drinks, you deal with a division of Innocent Drinks that's part of a bigger division that's part of Coca-Cola. So the mapping can take a long time if you want to make it really, really fundamentally full, complete, and then you can see where you can go.
I had this conversation yesterday with a business. It was quite interesting because I'd
Right.
already written the questions, and then this in the afternoon I was working with a client, and we had this very conversation about what was happening, about mapping a client. And I said you've got to look at it in a number of ways. That you've got any client that's above 50 heads, and the comment at the moment between 50 and 200 heads, client has round about 7 decision makers in there. If you're dealing with the bottom decision maker, then you're missing out, because that bottom decision maker might only be the person that's dealing with a small part of the recruitment. So the first question I asked about their business, which is the obvious question, which we've talked about quite a lot on these webinars, is do you know how much your client spends on recruitment? And do you know how much of that spend that you get? And they couldn't answer that question. That's fine. They couldn't answer it. So we talked about that. So then we started to talk about then who are the prospects in their business. They started to name some people who they thought were prospects, etc. And then asked a question that is the real question, I think, when you start to plan a client development. I asked them who their threats are. And their threats were all outside. AI is a threat, other recruitment agencies a threat, etc. So I turned around and said, okay, so is the CEO not a threat? Is the head of HR not a threat? Is the head of IT not a threat? Is the head of legal not a threat? Is the head of finance not a threat? And they went, why? I said, well, all of those people can stop you recruiting. All those people can have a reason why they shouldn't use your recruitment agency. So if you're not talking to all of those people, they could be the person that's dealing with another recruitment agency that's got a better product, better service, secure systems, whatever it be, okay? And that will squeeze you out. And there was a sudden realization that they were quite their relationship, their relationship were quite fragile with their clients. And it wasn't about trying to scare them, and it wasn't about trying to make them think that you should be managing your clients. It was about thinking about where's the opportunity, where's the threat? How do you grow one and nullify the other? And if you can grow one and nullify the other, then you're in a super position to move forward. But the biggest threat is the C-suite. So if you're not talking to the CEO or the CFO, then all of a sudden, then you've got a big, big problem, because they are the people who are the ultimate decision makers within the business, and that decision trickles down the line. And if you're the person at the bottom of that decision making train, and that's who you're getting your recruitment from, then you're not talking to the person who makes the ultimate decision on what's actually happening in that business. That is the biggest threat that I see in everyone. But it's because they haven't mapped the client. I don't know who the CEO is. I don't know who this person is. I don't know who that person is, because that person doesn't give them recruitment opportunities. They're not speaking to them. But if you want to expand your opportunity in a client, they're the actual people that you should be speaking to, because they're the people that will know everybody else within the business that has the channel. So if you've got your person at the bottom and you've created them into a sponsor, they should be telling these people, you need to speak to these people. But they should also be telling you, you should be going to speak to these people, sell this person a bit of service. I'm told I've got to use this agency, I've got told I've got to use that agency for this. Why aren't you selling to that person? So it's, have you created a sponsor or a customer from your buyer? And if it's a customer, you're never going to get pushed up the chain. If it's a sponsor, can they push you up the chain? And that, the bit, is what's changed. And I remember doing that with some of my clients, and all of a sudden we had a very different landscape to look at. And I took that from that one big client where I didn't realize there's another £1 million revenue stream in there, and said, right, how many other clients have we got like that? And all of a sudden we found 4 or 5 clients where we were missing opportunity and working opportunities and stuff like that from there. So here's a question.
I was going to say, how, just for you answer, visually, a really good example of this is if you ever watch one of the TV cop dramas, they always find a wall in a room, don't they? A grubby little wall, and they put the victim in the middle, the death or whatever, and then outside springs all of these different things with post-it notes. Even in modern day crime dramas, they still use post-it notes, and they map it all onto the wall and the evidence as it comes in. And I was taught that visually that's how we should see our clients. They're in the middle. Where do they branch to? Who are their suppliers? What's going on? And the more you can get, the better it is. And if you work for a company like we've done in very big companies, you've got 20 or 30 or 40 of those type of clients. But most companies have got less than 10 staff. So they're not dealing with hundreds and hundreds of clients. And their top 10, they may only have 10. So it's literally find that physical space and map them out.
So that was a question that came further down the channel on yesterday's meeting, was, well, how do I keep all this information?
Right.
And I said, well, when I was doing it, I had a Rolodex, and if I found a client, then I started to put all the people who were working in that client, and I started to mark the one off when they'd left and stuff like that, so I know who was working, who was there, and I started to mark that all off. And I turned around and I said, but when I went to my own recruitment agency and we brought in Bullhorn, and I'm pretty sure most CRMs have this facility, that you can create an organogram on there. And to me, it was the simplest thing. If you haven't created an organogram of your client on your own systems, then everything is a very, very disjointed piece of information, where you should have, there's the client, there's the organogram, and you should know how often and who you've spoken to within that client and what you've spoken to them about. And as a leader, you should be going in and say, right, let's look at this as one of our key clients. We haven't spoken to the CEO for 2 years. We haven't spoken to that. And that leads into that conversation about level selling. If you're the head of the business, why aren't you speaking to the head of their business? If you're the recruitment delivery, why aren't you speaking to the recruitment delivery, etc. So get the right people talking to the right people in the marketplace, in the client, and you're there.
Yeah.
From there. So here's a question that comes up quite a lot when I'm trying to sort of build a more stable client base with my clients. Here's the renewal reality that most avoid. How do you coach recruitment leaders to convert from a traditional 30-day rolling contract We all have those contracts that roll for those traditional 30 days, etc. In where you're scrambling around when it comes to the end, how do you get them to sell a contract that will maximize their revenue for a longer period of time? And what's the most sort of painful wake-up call that we've witnessed when people are trying to renew contracts and they've lost them?
The market is showing signs of coming back. That's a bold statement across all of recruitment. But we're seeing among our clients, most of our clients, our recruitment clients, are hiring because they're seeing a bit of a change in the market and they don't want to miss it as the wave comes in. They want to make sure they're surfing the right way. So that says to me, if the market's coming back, absolutely now is the time to have that conversation with clients about offering longer term contracts and articulating well to the client the benefits of that. Because candidates will become less available. It's true for us ourselves as recruitment people. You know, there's not a lot of good recruiters out there on the market, so let's get hold of the good ones. And in terms of candidates, if you're placing contractors, make sure that you can push for a longer contract, because otherwise they're going to be spending X amount of time renewing and having the same conversations again and again. And our job as advisors to our clients, to your point much earlier, Howard, is remind your clients of the time it takes to renew a contract, to find somebody else if that contractor leaves. That's the way the big RPO players used to sell RPO. Give it all to us, and all of the transactional part of recruitment we will do for you. And some of them, of course, do it very well. But we should be doing that, reminding our clients of the time it takes to renew. Therefore, let's get in for longer contracts. I worked with a business that had 60 contractors, and 30 of them were in one team, and they were coming to the end of the contract, and the only agency that the contractors hadn't updated as to what was going on was the agency that provided them, because they thought, well, if we let them know, they'll try and they won't stop us staying where we are. So they didn't let them know, and eventually they left. And the agency was behind the ball because they hadn't got all the up-to-date details. They should have had, but they didn't. So it really is important to stay close to the candidates, obviously, and the contractors, but also reminding the clients that long term now, as the market moves, is where you want to be, or longer term.
So it's interesting, isn't it, when you ask that question, because you've instantly jumped into a contractor being extended and extending a contractor. My view of the question was a contract that I have with a client, and usually it says in the contract that you can, resign from this contract within 30 days of writing to the client, etc., etc. And the client has the same opportunity. And I think when you lose a client's very painful, and losing a client that could have kept is even worse. And I think it's mainly because we didn't innovate and we didn't push the boundaries, we didn't explore the opportunities, and we have that view of they're never going to stop using me. And I look at some of the people on the call today. There's a lot of businesses on the call today where you're thinking, actually, that I've heard that from some of those people on that call. Don't worry, my big client's never going to stop using me. Well, you've got a 30-day rolling contract. To me, that's very precarious. And that's a very worrying place to be. But we talk about innovation in the recruitment game. We talk about innovation in our services, et cetera, et cetera. Why aren't we going to clients? You mentioned RPO there, Dave. Why aren't we going to the clients and going and say, okay, we've worked together for 4 or 5 years or 2 or 3 years, et cetera. The average age between 2 and 5 years. We've worked together for that. Why not, rather than have this contract here, why not now sign a contract where you use me exclusively for the next 3 years? And for this, what I want to understand what your projects you're doing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you've now ring-fenced the client for 2 or 3 years. Now, you know, and I know, Dave, when we work with clients that are going for a trade sale, one of the things that the M&A people look at is they look at the contract. And they look and say, right, you've got 2 years worth of coming out of that contract. Okay, that contract might be worth £5 million. And they'll put £5 million into that. Oh, you've got a contract here, a client here that you've got £5 million out of, but you've only got a 30-day rolling contract. will look at that 30-day rolling contract as the maximum they will value that client at, because that client can leave within those 30 days. So it's a very, very sort of precarious position. And I think it's a bit like, it's about a relationship, isn't it? If you let a relationship go stale and it becomes the norm, and you don't challenge the norm and refresh the why me, then that person, if they get a better person coming in, offering a slightly better service, will go for that person. But if you haven't locked that person in for marry them or whatever it be, then you're going to lose that. And that's a really uncomfortable place to be, I think. So I think we need to sort of think about, have a wake-up call and refresh our game, because once we start to feel comfortable with a client, we should start to think that's the wrong place to be. I should always feel uncomfortable with my client and always be looking to up my game.
Yeah, definitely.
So when you help recruitment leaders identify at-risk relationships, what's the most common denial that you encounter, and how do you get them to admit that their difficult but loyal client is actually got one foot out the door?
And it's a simple answer, Howard, and I'll do they don't regard they're at risk. That's the key issue when you speak to people. They'll say, no, it's fine. Honestly, it's fine. They know me. They're going to use me or my consultants or my company, my brand, or whatever it is. It's okay. I was golfing with them last week. We've just placed a team of people. They're delighted with me. You hear it all the time, and you recognise it because I've said it and I've been burned by it. So it's nothing new, but we don't sometimes want to face up to the fact that actually every single client we've got is at risk. It's either at risk from the consultant manager leaving, it's at risk because the way that they operate could be done by a much bigger organization. So I think it's just making that assumption that you said towards the end of the last answer, that if you assume that every client is at risk, you will work as hard as you can to keep them, and you will continue to question them. Am I doing a good job? What else can I do for you? What other services do you need? How's my consultant doing? Because often the risk is at the desk with the consultant. I have heard owners of businesses say, well, if she leaves and she deals with this client, she's got so many restrictive covenants, the client's perfectly safe. Well, from a legal point of view, that may be true, but the client's not thinking that. The client's just lost a really, really good individual personal supplier who works for you, and they will find a way if they need to get around that. So you've got to work hard and understand where the at risks may be, even if you think there's no risk at all.
So through the Teams network, I've been doing quite a lot of work this year with solo businesses. But the solo businesses that I've been sort of doing sort of sessions with have come in one or two guises. Either I'm a solo business that's been going for a while, and my clients that I took with me when I left my agency have now stopped recruiting, or I'm a solo business that started up because of I've just left an agency for whatever reason, and I'm taking my clients with me, exactly what you've just talked about then. And I've had the same comment to all of them. They've used me for years. They're always going to use me. Is not a contract that is an agreement legally that says they're going to use you. It's just a wish.
Yeah.
And if you want to build a business and you want to build a secure business, you've got to think every relationship is at risk, and therefore, could you replace that relationship? So when I was looking at my business, it was right, let's look at these 15 clients. And I'd always play the what if game. What if this client doubled what they were doing? How would we cope? What if this client flatlined? What does that mean? What if this client stopped using us? And I used to instruct my consultants to go away with a strategy for each one of those things. And then I would say, now let's take worst case scenario. What's going to happen? And everyone picked the worst case scenario as, if that client stops dealing with us, what are we going to do? And the answer was very simple. I'm going to have to replace that client. So what it said was that the difficulty about loyal clients is that you think you've got everything coming from them, but they can stop immediately, and you haven't been proactive in safeguarding that client by having another client that can instantly replace them. Now, if you want to grow a business, if your client base, let's say your top 3 clients are 50% plus of your gross profit, if you could keep those clients billing the same and more, but drop them to 20% of your gross profit, that means you're adding new clients in all the time. And therefore, if the client stops, it doesn't harm your business as much as it does when it's 50% plus. And some of the clients that I was dealing with, their major clients were 80 to 90% of their revenue. But when the new people come in and you start to have that conversation, they're going, well, why do I have to do new business? I've got these guys that are going to give me all their business. I said, well, what happens if they stop? And you get the same thing. They're never going to stop. They've been using me for years. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, but that actually happens. So I think to de-risk the relationship, it's about working what we've said before about into the relationship, but it's also having a replacement to that relationship, which will help your business grow and scale and not just be reliant, because to me, that is a very scary place if you're just reliant on those clients from there. So last question then. We've seen recruitment leaders rescue, or we've seen recruitment rescue deteriorating client relationships. What are the counterintuitive strategies that work when the conventional, let's go have a coffee, let's fix the problem, let's go have a chat? What sort of counterintuitive strategies have we approached and put into place that have helped regenerate deteriorating client relationships?
One of the best ones that I've ever been involved in working with was working with our team in marketing and going back to those clients that we suspected may not be enjoying the service that we think they are. In other words, we're at risk of losing them, and saying to them, we're putting together a portfolio of our key clients, and we'd like to come and talk to you about the service that we provide to you and quantify how much time and money that could save you. Half the clients would go, yeah, come on in, and we talk to them. The other half would then go, well, actually, it's not quite like that. I'm not sure we want to be an example of, because you obviously think you're doing really well, but you're not. But what it meant was, of the half that said, oh, I'm not sure, they were nervous about it, it allowed us to prod and allowed us to ask some more questions and have some meetings. And as we look back a year later, we won about 40% of the other half that we were going to lose. At some point, we were going to lose them, and we managed to keep 40% of them. Yeah. So that may only be 2 out of 10 clients. 5 stayed, then another 2 stayed, but we didn't lose half the clients. And it was a very simple technique. And it was very well done with the marketing team. And it doesn't even have to be a marketing team. It could be a person that you use to help with your marketing. But just get close to your clients, as close as you can, in whatever means it takes, and find out what it is that they may not like about what you're doing, or what it is that you could do better. Or even better, what is it that someone else is doing for your client that you're not, that your client would like you to do as well?
Quite interesting that I approached the same issue with a similar type of approach that you're talking about there. So rather than saying, we want to be one of your top clients, you want to, et cetera, we went in and saying, we are developing a new innovative service, and we want your specific feedback on how you think this would work, because we trust you and deliver your feedback. So that suddenly opens the question about that trust conversation. And so with them, you could go and have a conversation with them. You can talk about your speed, your quality, your quantity, your data input, cost, market positioning, et cetera, et cetera. But it was then, once we started to talk about what we were trying to achieve and what we were trying to achieve for them, that they started to talk about what they were trying to achieve. And once we understood what they were trying to achieve and what goals they were trying to get to, we could then help and create a bespoke, tailored service to them. And then the clients start to see as a partner rather than as a just an everyday recruiter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was the sort of huge difference that we started to see when we started to reach out to clients. But what was even more interesting, when we started to reach out to new clients, starting to use the same tactics. We want to come and talk to you about an innovative service that we're using with some of our clients now, but we've come across you and we want to have a conversation with you about whether you think this innovative service would be of interest to you or whether it would work in the marketplace. Oh my God, we got almost 100% people saying, yeah, come and see us, come and talk to us about it, because they thought they were going to get something different to what they've already got. And boy, could we go in and have then conversations with clients and open clients up. But it was all about that thought from the client about innovation. What are you doing to innovate your services? What are you doing to help me to deliver and achieve my goals? And once they understood what was in it for them, and that innovation was directly aimed at them, all of a sudden that relationship became tighter and tighter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Okay.
that was the bit. And it's the difference between just letting your recruitment service just tick over. And I'll say this now, if you're recruiting the same as you did 3 years ago, you're not innovating. You haven't innovated.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, you're actually going backwards. And it doesn't take long then for another recruitment agency to come in with just a slightly better service to push you out, because that says that you haven't got a loyal relationship with your client, let alone an advocacy one. You're not even close to trust. You've just got a transactional relationship. So I think it's important that we start to look at all of those things and drive those things, because without those things, we tend to start to lose what's actually happening.
Great.
So, Dave, first webinar back.
Yes.
Ladies and gents, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next week, we've got a really interesting, the next 2 weeks, actually, we've got some really interesting webinars coming up. Next week, we're going to talk about Q4 performance maximization. So turning the final quarter into your strongest quarter. And then on the 1st of October, we've got someone coming in, a guy called Cyborg coming in, who talks about technology upgrades and how system optimization can help future-proof your business and develop your business. So this is all about business development. It's all about generating what's good for how to finish this year off, whether it's been a poor year today or not, how to finish it off with a bang, but how to start 2026 off on the right foot. So ladies and gents, thanks for your time. It's been great to be back, and we look forward to seeing you all again next week. Dave, thanks for your time. See you again, same time, same time.
Cheers. Thank you, everybody. Have a good week. Thank you.